Well, good morning, everyone. One thing I forgot to say last week. So you guys have a new preacher, from what I hear. Um, Make sure everyone invite someone that you know to come visit. Right? It's an easy way to just invite someone. Tell them we have this new amazing preacher. He's super handsome. Tell them to come visit. We would love to have some people come by, and that way I get to meet them. That way we all get to grow our family a little bit. This morning, there once was a young man who walked into my counseling office on a rainy November day. His facial features looking down, he looked as dreary as the weather outside. His story was similar to the scenes of other stories that counselors tend to hear. This young man had everything money could buy: big house, fine car, prestige, power. Yet the night before, he had announced to his wife and his children that he was leaving. When confronted by his wife for an explanation, he said, "It's time for me to be happy." So many people in this world are looking for that thing that we call happiness. Everywhere in our society, you see evidence of that quest. It seems that some, in our culture believe, that it's a constitutional right, something to be guaranteed, right? In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote that the rights guaranteed to humanity by God are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. These three come from John Locke's philosophy, who put life, liberty, and property. But at the time, Jefferson wanted to use the term happiness, but he used it with a deeper philosophical meaning of human flourishing, right? But today, the word happiness often means just feeling good. Counselors often hear of those looking, searching, reaching out for happiness. Three adjectives counselors hear almost weekly are empty, loneliness, and meaningless. Many people feel a hole inside them. They don't know what it is. They don't know what causes it. They don't know what to do about it. And the words often say, I feel so empty. I feel so lonely. Everything seems meaningless. It may be that they're living in a large city with 1.5 million people, but or they're in a crowded neighborhood or in a crowded apartment complex, yet they still feel lonely. They may possess so many, you know, objects and possessions, and yet they still feel empty. There are so many people who are just asking the questions, what difference is it all? We're obsessed with this quest to be happy. Yet I don't think there's anything more elusive, like a rabbit that darts across a field, than happiness. We're trying to catch up to it, we're trying to find it, we're trying to trap it. But everywhere you look, it just darts away, hides behind another bush. There was the story of a youth minister who met a 15-year-old boy, and the 15-year-old just looked absolutely miserable. And the youth minister said, "What's the matter?" The boy said, "I'm just so unhappy. I can't wait till I turn 16 and I get my driver's license." A year and a half later, the youth minister pulled up to a red light and saw the young man. He was in his parents' station wagon. He lowered down his window and said, "Well, you've gotten your license." "Yeah," the young man mumbled. Minister said, "Well, you don't look very happy about it. I thought you'd be as happy as you could be." And the kid said, "Well, have you ever driven a station wagon? This is the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen in my life. If I get my own car, then I'd just be happy." A couple years later, Youth minister pulled up beside the young man again. This time he's in a beautiful sports car, and youth minister said, "Well, you got your car." Young man said, "Yeah." Said, "Well, I thought you'd be happy when you got this car." The boy said, "My mom and dad, they have so many rules. In just a few months, though, I'm about to get out of here. I'm going to be off to college. I'm going to be on my own. I get to call the shots. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. Then I'll be happy." A few years later, the minister went to visit the university for a seminar, ran across the young man across campus. Young man had his typical sour face. Minister said, "Hey, I thought you'd be happy when you got away from home." Young man said, "Have you ever eaten college cafeteria food? It's terrible. Jello for breakfast, jello for lunch. It's horrible. But I found a good girlfriend. If I can just get off campus, get married, get into a nice apartment, then I'm going to be happy." The young man was found by the youth minister a couple years later, married. The minister went to their home, knocked on the door. The young man came to the door, baby in one hand, dirty pamper in the other, and you know where this goes. There is this idea of just the most elusive commodity, happiness. It's always just right around the corner. One person said, and I think this is fairly true, most folks are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. I like that. It seems we often fool ourselves into thinking that happiness is just the next hit song away, right? The next concert, the next trip to the amusement park, whatever it may be. Happiness is just as far away as my team winning the Super Bowl, or my next job, or my next marriage, the next town over, the next promotion. We fool ourselves into thinking that we can fill that emptiness within ourselves with other things, right? We work hard, we become materialistic. We fool ourselves into thinking loneliness can be solved by discovering the right relationship. So we spend our lives in these codependent cycles, looking continually for somebody that we think can make us happy. We spend our lives thinking our meaninglessness can be solved by a purpose over involvement. So we become workaholics and work at such a self destructive pace. And yet, no matter all of it, happiness just eludes us. I always think of Tom Landry. Tom Landry is Texas Hall of Fame. In Texas, there's Jesus, and then there's Tom Landry, you know? But I've heard him share the emptiest and loneliest time of his life. It occurred immediately after the victory in his first world championship, when him and Vince Lombardi were both player coaches for the New York Giants. They had just won the highest honor in professional football. Landry says that following that victory, he was the loneliest he had ever been. He was sitting in a hotel in the most crowded city in the world, and yet he never felt more alone. And it was at that precise moment that he realized there was more to life than football. And his commitment to Jesus actually grew out of that realization. And it sounds like Solomon in Ecclesiastes looking for happiness. These are some very powerful words from the man who was perhaps one of the richest men, if not the richest man alive at the time. He said, "I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks. I made myself pools. I bought male and female slaves. I had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of men. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind." Happiness is the great question confronting mankind. The whole world is longing for happiness, and it's just tragic to see the way people fail to catch it. You know, happiness comes from the Latin word hap. And it means luck or chance. It's the same root word for the word happenstance, right? And so it means coincidence. Happiness is purely dependent on circumstances, external things, things that fall together perfectly. When your happiness is dependent on something, then your happiness is only going to be as stable as whatever it is on. When your happiness is based upon your bank account, when your bank account's low, you're not going to be happy. When your happiness is based upon your marriage, well, like any marriage, you might hit a rough spot and then you're not going to be happy. Your happiness is only as stable as the thing that brings it. And in contrast to our perpetual pursuits of happiness, God seems to portray happiness as a serendipity of a God focused life. Now, the word serendipity has a very interesting history. It's a fun word to say, too, serendipity. You had one author who wrote this letter about an unexpected discovery he made. He related this unexpected discovery to a Persian fairy tale called The Three Princes of Serendip. Serendip is the old Arabic name for what we now call Sri Lanka. In the story, you have three princes coming from Serendip. The princes repeatedly, they were very sharp and very smart. They would repeatedly make um, observations. They would make discoveries, not because they were looking for them, though. They were just observant. They were wise. They were able to put pieces together and put clues together that were often overlooked. And so the Three Princes of Serendip is this fairy tale about those princes. The father sends them out into the world to gain experience that you can't find in books. And as they travel, they constantly solve mysteries. They make astonishing discoveries, not because they witness it themselves, but because they're looking for things. And in the most famous story of the fairy tale, the princes never see this missing camel, but they correctly deduce that the camel is blind in one eye, lame, missing a tooth, carrying butter and honey. They arrive at these conclusions by observing footprints, grazing patterns, insects along the road. They weren't looking for the camel, but they were observant and they recognized the clues. And that's the idea behind the word serendipity, making an unexpected discovery through careful observation and wisdom, not just good luck. And over time, English speakers have shortened the meaning today to simply mean serendipity means, oh, just a happy accident, a fortunate coincidence. But the idea wasn't just luck, it was a prepared mind making an unexpected discovery. And I think that works very well for happiness. It reminds me of Alexander Fleming, the person who discovered penicillin. In 1928, he noticed a mold had contaminated one of the bacteria cultures, and the bacteria had been killed. And while the contamination itself was accidental, because he was prepared, he discovered the first widely used antibiotic. It was purely serendipitous. God seems to present happiness not as something that you pursue and find, but as a serendipity of a life centered on him. Just like the princes of Serendip, they weren't searching for the discoveries they made, but they found them through attentiveness, right? And so scripture repeatedly portrays joy and blessedness as something that accompanies those who seek God rather than seeking happiness itself. The person whose highest aim is to know God, to obey his will, to love others, along the way, you will find that contentment. It is the byproduct, not the destination. Solomon in Ecclesiastes, he's constantly pursuing happiness, and he never finds it. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Not seek happiness. The focus is on God. not emotional fulfillment. And ironically, because when happiness is the goal, it slips through your fingers. But when our lives revolve around God, His purpose, His kingdom, we discover a deeper joy than you would ever have if you had just searched for the joy directly. Happiness is this holy serendipity, the unexpected blessing found by those seeking something even greater. Your happiness is as stable as the thing that brings it. The best way to have happiness is to base that happiness on God, since He is the most stable rock you can find. Like I said, if your happiness is based upon your bank account, I imagine your bank account goes up and down, right? When it goes down, so does your happiness. Your happiness is based upon how well your sports team is doing at the time. It's going to go up and down. When your happiness is based on God, it is stable because God is unchanging. We could also say, what about blessedness? I think blessedness and happiness are not the same thing, but they border each other. Christians should I think you should base your happiness on your blessedness, right? You can be blessed and not happy, right? God can give you a lot of blessings and you're still not happy. That's because your happiness is based on something else. Christians have to base their happiness on their blessedness and think to themselves, if I'm blessed by God, everything is okay. If I have God, I don't need anything else. As long as I'm a child of God, I have a reason to be glad. So the word blessed is a very important word, right? Blessed, you could say, well, it's a state or condition where you have blessings from God. It means you have God's favor. Let me look at the unique ways that the Greeks would use this word. So blessed. We initially we just say, well, it means to have God's favor, but there's some depth to it. When Jesus would use this Greek word in the Greek context, it carried with it those meanings. First, it often referred to the gods, the perfect state of the gods. In Greek mythology, the gods lived in another realm, right? They lived on Mount Olympus. They didn't live their lives. They lived their lives, but not on Earth. They really didn't care about the affairs of men, right? They didn't care about the troubles of the world. They were so very apathetic to humanity. The Greeks called the gods apatheia, which means without suffering. That's where we get the word apathy. The word apatheia, it describes how they were just so standoffish from humanity. Humanity might be in trouble, they might be warring, they might be fighting, they have all the problems in the world, but the gods were completely unaffected. In that way, the gods were blessed. The word was often described the state of the dead. When a person dies, their soul leaves the earth and goes into whatever place they believed, whether it be heaven, Tartarus, or wherever. Now, they're no longer on this world. They're no longer affected by the problems of today. When someone passes, they no longer have to deal with the hardships of this world, the misery, the suffering, the hardships. And in that way, they are blessed. The word was often described someone in an oasis in a desert. You have a traveler who's traveling through the desert and he has to put up with the scorching sun beating down upon him, the heat in the day, the extreme cold at night, the harsh winds, the sand, the terrible thirst. But imagine he finds an oasis, right? He goes into the oasis, he wraps his head with a shroud, he turns his back to the wind, he rests, and he begins to eat his provisions. He drinks his rationed water. In that oasis, he's protected from the harsh environment of the desert. In that way, he is blessed. And one more, well, there's the island of Cyprus. The Greeks were just the Greeks were accustomed to shouting in reference to Cyprus, the blessed island. The island was considered blessed because you didn't have to leave the island for anything. That island, you could be born on the island and everything you needed was on that island. All your sustenance, the climate, the natural resources, everything just on one island. You never had to leave the island for anything you would ever need because everything you need is right there. And that way, that island is blessed. And so when you put all of it together, you get this concept, this idea of being unaffected by things in the world, protected from harsh conditions, where everything you have is provided. That's the idea behind being blessed. That is the state of God that God gives to those who answer his call, to those who are his disciples, to have everything you need, to be protected and unaffected by the circumstances of the world. That's what it means to be blessed. And I guess my point is, when you're blessed, you should be happy. When you are a disciple of Jesus, God provides everything you need, protects you from the suffering of the world, and our happiness should be based upon the fact that I am blessed by God. And that doesn't mean that you might always have a smile on your face, but it always means you have a reason to have joy, that you always have a reason to be glad. Even though the difficulties of life do hit us hard at times, there's no denying that. But at the end of the day, no matter what happens to me, I still have Jesus. There is this happiness, and it's not always the happiness you wear on your face. Honestly, I prefer the word joy to happiness because when I think of happiness, I think of a smile on my face. But when I think of joy, I think of this optimism, this gladness, this contentment to say I may be going through a really tough time right now, but I can hold my head up high because I have God. Whatever you go through, losing a job, losing a loved one, feeling alone, whatever the hardships that come along, God's blessings will give you a reason to rejoice. I'm not going to say you're not going to have bad days. I'm not going to say bad things aren't going to happen to you. I'm going to say you'll always have a reason to smile even when you don't feel like smiling. Jesus talked about being blessed. What do we consider blessed? I often hear that word to describe someone who has an incredible talent, someone who has a lot of wealth, someone with a large family, someone with a nice house, nice car. Oh, that person is blessed. You're blessed to have it. You're blessed to have this. What does Jesus call blessed? In Matthew 5, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. These are the things Jesus calls blessed. When you see these things in life, do you think, well, that person's blessed? Because we should. Let me put that into perspective. He mentions poor in spirit. When you see someone at the end of their rope and they say, I can't do this, I need God. Do you call that person blessed? Jesus did. How about those who mourn? A person praying to God confesses a grave sin they committed with tears in their eyes. Do you call that person blessed? Jesus did. About those who mourn. A person who grabbed the last, those who, the meek. A person who grabbed the last piece of pie. But he noticed someone else wanted it, so he gave it away. Jesus called that person blessed. Someone who is excited to study their Bible, someone who is excited to do other things for people. Jesus called that person blessed. Someone who forgives a friend for bringing back their car with a giant dent in it. Jesus called that person blessed. Someone who is careful what they say, what they do, and careful what they think because they're trying to avoid sin in their lives. Jesus called that person blessed. Or how about someone who sees two of his friends in a deep argument with one another and he steps in to try to calm things down and try to avoid the escalation? Jesus called that person blessed. How about a young woman who is ostracized on her campus for quoting God's word against immoral beliefs? Jesus called that person blessed. When we use that word, let's use it like Jesus used it. When our focus is on being blessed, you find happiness as a byproduct. When you're focused on being poor in spirit, mourning, being meek, hungering and thirsting for righteousness, being merciful, being pure in heart, being a peacemaker, being the kind of person who would be persecuted, you are blessed. Because when I say happiness, I'm not saying everything's going to be perfect. I'm going to say the most important things are perfect in your life. And the most important thing is your relationship with God. And so, just to put it all together this morning, the most lasting happiness you will ever have comes as a byproduct from focusing on being blessed by God. I believe that through and through. Your happiness should be dependent on your blessedness, your status before God. One of the key things that I personally believe is being a Christian will maximize the joy in your life and minimize the hardships in your life. I believe that with my whole heart. Not saying you won't have any hardships, not saying it's all going to be joy, but I believe being a Christian will maximize the joys you will ever have and minimize the hardships you will ever have. To be blessed by God means you have his favor. Means you have everything that you require. It means you are protected from the harms of the world. He says that you're blessed if you are poor in spirit, if you mourn, if you meek, if you hunger and thirst for righteousness, if you are merciful, if you are a peacemaker, if you're even persecuted. If you are these things, then you have God's favor. You have a reason to be glad, even when life didn't give you a reason to be glad. Being a Christian means you always have something good in your life. Always. It means regardless of whether you're having a good day or a bad day, you have a reason, you have comfort to know that you're blessed, to know that God loves you, to know that God watches over you, to know that God sent his son to die for you so that you could receive it by faith, so that you could join him in the death, burial, and resurrection to be a child of God. And when you have that in your life, how can you not have joy? Simply, don't search for happiness. Strive to be blessed. Seek God, his kingdom, his righteousness. And on the way, you'll find more happiness than you ever would have otherwise. So the question this morning is, are you seeking him or are you seeking happiness? To those who find themselves seeking that elusive rabbit we call happiness and find themselves failing, the invitation is going to be for you as we sing this next song.